There's something sacred about a quiet Saturday morning in July, especially when you're 34, have 0 kids, work in IT consulting, and your only plans include coffee, Spotify's Chill Vibes playlist, and floating in your hard-earned backyard pool while pretending to care about your vitamin D intake. That's exactly what I had in mind. After spending nearly a decade in tiny apartments that were smaller than most people's laundry rooms, eating enough instant ramen to make a sodium scientist weep, I'd finally made it. Bought myself a modest 3-bedroom slice of suburban heaven last spring. And while the house itself wasn't winning any design awards, the real gem was out back, a glorious in-ground pool. Small? Sure. But sparkling, deep blue, and mine. All mine. I'd spent 3 straight months fine-tuning every detail, upgraded the filtration system, had new tiles put in that somehow cost more than my first car, even landscaped the perimeter so I could sip cheap beer in a lawn chair and feel like I was at some overpriced Airbnb. The dream. Now the neighborhood? Reasonably tolerable. On the left were the Johnsons, a retired couple whose idea of wild living was putting wind chimes in their front yard. Nice folks. On the right, the Martinez family, 2 working parents and a pair of polite, wave every time, see you kids. Adorable. And then there was Karen. Karen lived 3 doors down. If you've ever had the misfortune of meeting someone who manages to turn a friendly good morning into a passive-aggressive performance art piece, then you know the type. Suburban royalty in yoga pants. Her hair always styled like she just walked out of a local news anchor audition, and with a tone of voice that suggested she'd been personally wronged by the concept of boundaries. She lived with her husband, Brad. Yes, Brad. And their twin boys who were either incredibly hyper or possibly possessed. The jury's still out. Our initial interaction came the day I moved in when she strolled over to introduce herself by way of asking if I'd be willing to host her book club meetings, since her quaint little house was too small and mine had better energy. You know, as if that's a normal thing to ask a stranger who still had unpacked boxes on the lawn. When I politely declined, because, you know, I like peace, quiet, and not having Chardonnay-fueled women dissecting where the crawdads sing in my yard, she smiled that tight-lipped Karen smile and said, "Oh, I figured you could work somewhere else that day. Starbucks is nice. Red flag? Try red carpet, fireworks, and a siren." A few weeks later, she knocked again. This time it was, "Hi, our pool's being serviced. Mind if the boys take a dip in yours? Just for an hour?" When I mentioned the words liability and insurance, she tilted her head like I was speaking Elvish. "You're so unfriendly," she muttered as she walked off, muttering about how this neighborhood used to be different. Oh, Karen, you sweet summer child. Anyway, back to that Saturday morning. I was in my kitchen, mid-coffee prep, humming to myself like the naive fool I was. Through the window, I admired the tranquil shimmer of my pool, the rays of sunlight glinting off the water like a scene from a meditation app commercial. That's when I heard it. Voices. Loud ones. Female ones. Multiple. Laughter, splashing, the unmistakable crack of a canned drink being opened. And not the cute kind of laughter either. I'm talking full-on mom's gone wild energy. Confused, I walked over to the sliding glass door, and what I saw nearly made me drop my overpriced, ethically sourced ceramic coffee mug. For women, none of whom I recognized, were in my pool. Not near it. Not beside it. In my pool. Sipping mimosas, lounging on pool floats that hadn't been there yesterday, and talking like they were catching up on the latest Real Housewives drama. Pool floats, drinks, snacks, even towels laid out on my chairs. Like I was running a goddamn Marriott. And there she was, Karen, standing poolside with the posture of someone giving a TED Talk. Clipboard in hand, of course she had a clipboard, orchestrating the chaos like she was directing a photo shoot for Suburban Living Monthly. She wasn't even trying to be subtle. For a full 30 seconds, I stood there blinking, trying to process the surrealism of what I was seeing. Was I dreaming? Did I finally suffer a complete mental break from too many quick turnarounds at work? Was this some sort of influencer prank video? Nope. This was real. Karen had invaded my yard like a wine-fueled general, and her army was already neck-deep in my chlorinated sanctuary. I slid the door open, slowly, the way you do when you're not sure if you're about to have a conversation or call the cops. The air hit me, hot, humid, and now tinged with the unmistakable scent of coconut tanning oil and citrus hard seltzer. The Karenites noticed me instantly, but not in the way normal people react when caught trespassing. No guilty startles, no hurried apologies. They smiled, waved. Karen turned, her face beaming with the smugness of someone who genuinely believed she was doing me a favor. "Oh, good morning," she chirped. "I hope you don't mind. I was just telling my friends how beautiful your pool is, and we decided it would be perfect for our book club meeting. Isn't it inspiring?" Inspiring. As if my backyard was suddenly doubling as an art installation. "You decided to have your meeting here?" I asked, careful to keep my tone level. Without asking me, Karen shrugged like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Well, I knocked. You didn't answer. And the side gate was unlocked, so we figured, why not? Because that's how property rights work now, apparently. If it's unlocked, it's open season." One of her friends, a blonde woman whose sunglasses probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, chimed in from her flamingo float. "This pool is amazing. You're so lucky to have such a generous neighbor, Karen." Generous neighbor. Right. I blinked again, slowly, deliberately, like I was rebooting. "And the floats?" I asked. "Oh, those are ours," Karen said proudly. "We brought a few things to make it more comfortable. Don't worry, we'll clean up." Right. Because when someone breaks into your yard and uses your pool without permission, the least they can do is clean up. How considerate. Another friend chimed in, a redhead with enough plastic surgery to qualify as a different species. "Don't be so serious, honey. We're just enjoying a little water therapy." Water therapy. Right. Karen smirked, mistaking my silence for resignation. "Look, we'll only be here for a couple of hours. You probably weren't even using it. Besides, it's not like you can swim in all this space at once." Ah, yes, the logic of freeloaders. If you're not currently using something, clearly it belongs to the next entitled person in line. And that was the exact moment I knew. Karen didn't just have audacity. She had a PhD in it, complete with a minor in creative trespassing and an honorary degree in gaslighting 101. But fine. If she wanted a pool party, she was about to learn just how expensive crashing one could be. Standing on my deck in sleepwear and slippers, staring at 4 unauthorized guests cannonballing into my pool while Karen wielded a clipboard like it was the Constitution, I started to understand why some people just pack up and move to the woods. "Excuse me," I said, voice firm but polite, like I was hosting a surprise intervention for neighborhood delusion. "Can someone please explain why strangers are currently doing synchronized swimming routines in my backyard?" Karen, clearly mistaking my clenched jaw and rising blood pressure for friendly neighbor banter, smiled brightly. "Oh, relax. We're just here for a couple of hours. It's book club. We needed a new venue and yours was just so accommodating." Accommodating. I glanced at the gate, still swinging slightly in the breeze. Unlocked. Yes, but only because I was under the foolish impression that grown adults understood the concept of private property. "Karen," I said slowly, "you do realize this is trespassing, right? You can't just walk into someone's backyard and throw a pool party." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, waving a hand like she was swatting away common sense. "We're not doing anything wrong. You weren't even using it. And you didn't think to call? Text, write a note, and leave it under a rock like we're back in middle school." "I did knock," she offered, as if the act of lightly tapping on a door justified a full-scale invasion. "That's not how consent works, Karen. You can't knock, get no answer, and assume the answer was sure. Have at it. I'll bring the chips." Karen sighed, like I was the unreasonable one here, and turned to her minions. "Honestly, I don't know what the big deal is. This is just suburban sharing. Isn't that what community is about?" Oh, great. Now she was quoting fake platitudes from a Hallmark HOA handbook. One of the women, the redhead, lounged on a swan-shaped float like Cleopatra on vacation and offered up her own gem. "You should be flattered, you know. Not everyone gets to host us." I looked at her. She blinked behind diamond-studded sunglasses that could have paid off my student loans. "Flattered," I repeated. That's one word for it. Others include violated, infuriated, and legally actionable. The blonde, still glued to her flamingo raft, sipped her drink and gave a lazy smile. We'll be out soon. You really should install a hot tub, by the way. That would just complete the vibe. Oh, sure. Maybe I'll throw in a personal masseuse too. And a valet. I turned back to Karen, trying to rein in the part of me that was ready to dial 911 and open with, "Hi. Yes, I'd like to report an infestation of Botox and boundary issues. Karen, I'm going to ask you one more time, get out of my pool." She rolled her eyes with the melodrama of a teenager denied Wi-Fi. "I didn't think you'd be such a stickler. It's just a pool. Then you won't mind just leaving it." Silence. For a beat, the atmosphere shifted. Her friends looked at each other. The redhead adjusted her sunglasses. The blonde stopped sipping. Karen narrowed her eyes. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't a spontaneous dip. This was planned. Coordinated. She'd brought the clipboard, the floats, the towels, probably even matching pool playlists. She'd scoped this out. She'd waited until I was out, aka didn't answer the door, and assumed she could steamroll her way through yet another passive-aggressive conquest. But Karen had miscalculated. I wasn't just a chill IT guy with a nice backyard and a conflict allergy. I was also professionally trained in systems analysis, loophole finding, and digital revenge. And I'd had enough corporate clients treat me like a doormat to recognize a pattern when I saw one. "Okay," I said suddenly, switching gears with a smile so calm it scared me. "You're right. It is just a pool." Karen blinked. "Wait, really?" "Oh, absolutely. Pools are for sharing. For relaxing. For community." Her smile crept back. "See? I knew you were reasonable." I nodded and pulled out my phone. "Which is why I'll need to make sure everything's above board. For insurance purposes, of course." "Insurance. Of course. Liability. Permits. I mean, technically, if you're using the space for a group event, that's a commercial activity, right? Book club? With multiple attendees? That's an organized gathering. There are rules." The redhead sat up straighter. "Wait, are you saying we're being charged?" Karen frowned. "He's joking." "You're joking." "Joking," I said, scrolling on my phone. No. I'd never joke about Municipal Code 34.18.7a. You know, the one about unauthorized use of recreational property for unlicensed gatherings. The blonde actually dropped her drink. "This is ridiculous," Karen hissed. "You can't just charge us for using your pool." "Karen, you're in my yard. You brought guests. You brought equipment. That's a rental package. I'm just playing by your rules. After all, what kind of host would I be if I didn't provide a detailed invoice?" "You're insane." "Maybe," I said, not breaking eye contact. "But I'm also the guy whose pool you're currently squatting in." The color started to drain from Karen's face. Slowly, deliciously. "Let's see. Current rates for private pool rentals in this zip code, $200 an hour per person, plus a $300 cleaning fee, plus a $1,000 trespassing surcharge." "You made that up," she sputtered. "You made up that this was a public amenity. At least I'm honest about the fees." The energy around the pool shifted again. No more giggles or cocktail chatter. Just tension, thick enough to float on. I looked at Karen's clipboard and then at her. "I hope you brought your checkbook." Karen was still standing there, clutching her clipboard like it held the secrets to diplomacy, corporate policy, and divine intervention all at once. But it didn't. It just had notes, probably scribbled in pink gel pen, on which type of rose paired best with light summer reeds, and how to make guilt look like generosity. I kept my smile steady, the same one I used when explaining to a CEO why their company's database had crashed after ignoring 6 months of warnings. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a "this is going to cost you" smile. "Let me break it down for you," I said, tapping away on my phone. "Private pool rental, per head, per hour, $200. We'll round down and say you've been here 1 hour so far, though the clock's still ticking. That's $800. Karen blinked, clearly unprepared for math this early in the brunch hour. "Add in an emergency cleaning fee," I continued, "because I have no idea what's in those drinks or if any of your floaties are leaking dollar store glitter. That's $300. "You're not serious," said the redhead, her face growing paler than the Botox would allow. "Oh, I'm deadly serious," I said, eyes still locked on Karen. "Then we've got the unauthorized entry surcharge. Technically, that's trespassing. But I'm nice, so instead of pressing charges, I'm billing you. That's $1,000. One of the women started gathering her things. "Finally, Karen," the blonde hissed. "You said he was fine with it." "I thought he would be." Karen snapped, her voice now climbing an octave and shedding that smug friendliness like a molting snake. "But you didn't ask." I interjected cheerfully. "You just assumed. And you know what they say about assumptions, Karen. They make you pay unexpected fees and ruin your clipboard's credibility." Karen glared at me, but there was panic behind the fury now. Panic and the distinct realization that this situation was spiraling beyond her control. The kind of realization usually reserved for people who try to argue with TSA agents or challenge waiters on tipping customs. "Okay," she said, holding up a hand. "Let's be reasonable." "Oh, I am," I said. "I'm being very reasonable. Because the final fee, the one for organizing an unauthorized event on private residential property, is a flat $5,000. I've generously waived the deposit requirement." "You're making this up," she said, though her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. "I'm enforcing boundaries, Karen. Something I assume your parents skipped over when teaching you about property law." The other women were now actively trying to exit the pool without making eye contact. The flamingo float deflated slightly as it scraped against the steps, producing a long, sad wheeze that perfectly captured Karen's withering control. "Let's just go," said the redhead. "This is embarrassing." "No," Karen said, but it came out weak. "He can't do this." "Actually," I said, "I can. And just to be crystal clear, this conversation is being recorded." I turned my phone screen toward her. The recording icon glowed like a beacon of karma. "For liability purposes, of course." Her mouth opened and closed again. "Goldfish mode activated. You'll be receiving an invoice via email," I said. "If I don't have your address, I'm happy to hand it to code enforcement. They love resolving boundary disputes." "You wouldn't." "I would. I already have a folder labeled Karen Incidents. It's filling up fast." "I'm not paying you anything," she hissed. I shrugged. "You don't have to. You could always let a small claims court decide. But just a heads up, judges don't love trespassing, especially when there's alcohol and zero consent involved." At this point, Karen's friends had fully entered abandoned ship mode. Towels were being packed, floaties deflated, and one woman audibly muttered, "This is why we never go to Karen's book club." The gate creaked open. One by one, they slipped out. No more giggles. No more poolside therapy. Just the quiet shame of people who'd realized they were about to be the subject of an embarrassing story, and not the good kind. Karen remained, of course, the last general on a battlefield of damp towels and dashed expectations. She was still holding her clipboard, now soaked from one of her friends splashing it in their panic to flee. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low, seething. "Oh, Karen," I said, stepping onto the deck and meeting her eye. "It was over the moment you treated my property like a public park. Now it's just billing." She looked like she wanted to say more, to deliver one of those Karen speeches full of faux indignation and empty legal threats. But all that came out was an angry huff as she turned and stomped out the gate, her shoes squishing with every step. And as the gate clicked shut behind her, I stood alone beside my pool, my peaceful, chlorinated paradise, wondering just how far she'd be willing to take this. Spoiler alert, much further. But that was fine. I had time, a camera wish list, and more than enough sarcasm to handle whatever suburban war Karen thought she was about to start. Let the games begin. I thought I'd seen the limits of Karen's entitlement, that I had reached the peak of her self-importance and could now descend safely back into the gentle, chlorine-scented valley of peace and quiet. But no, Karen, it turned out, wasn't just entitled. She was vengeful, vindictive, and armed with her new favorite weapon, bureaucracy. 3 days after the Great Pool siege, I was in the middle of a Zoom call with a client who thought urgent meant this could have been an email when the doorbell rang. Once, twice, then a series of rapid-fire dings that practically spelled, Open the door, or I'll file a complaint. I muted the call and opened the front door to find Karen standing on my porch like she was hosting an open house for rage. She wasn't alone. Flanking her like sentient bad decisions were two people, a woman in a stiff navy blue blazer clutching a leather-bound folder, and a man wearing khakis, a utility belt, and the kind of stern expression typically reserved for fire code violations and expired water heaters. "Mr. Stevens?" the woman asked. "I'm Margaret. I'm with the HOA. And this is Bill from Municipal Code Enforcement. We're here because of a report we received regarding unauthorized commercial activity on your property." Behind them, Karen was vibrating with smugness. She didn't say anything, but her expression screamed, "This is what happens when you mess with me, peasant." "Unauthorized what?" I asked, though I already knew exactly where this was going. Margaret flipped open her folder with all the grace of a judge unsealing a courtroom verdict. According to a report from Mrs. Henderson, she gestured at Karen, who did a tiny wave. "You were conducting a commercial pool rental business without the proper permits. That's a violation of residential zoning regulations." I blinked, long and slow. She said, "What now?" Mrs. Henderson provided detailed information about a fee structure. Margaret continued, adjusting her glasses, "Including hourly rates, surcharges, and event terms." "You mean the imaginary invoice I rattled off to get 4 trespassers out of my pool?" I said. "Commercial language was used," Bill added, "as if I'd been caught printing counterfeit Disney dollars. That constitutes probable cause to investigate an unlicensed business operation." And there it was, the Karen nuclear option. I'd played the sarcastic landlord. She came back as the HOA's fake lawyer with backup. Karen finally spoke, and her voice was dripping with glee. "I told them I didn't want to report you, but I just couldn't let our neighborhood fall into chaos. We have rules, you know. Rules. From the woman who used my pool like a bottle service cabana." "Well," I said, forcing myself to stay calm, "thank you for bringing this to my attention. It's good to know that Mrs. Henderson is so concerned with legal compliance." Karen beamed. I wasn't sure if she thought she'd scared me or if she was just proud of weaponizing local government like a Disney villain with a real estate license. "But while you're here," I continued, stepping aside slightly, "let me clear a few things up." Margaret and Bill exchanged a glance. "I am not, nor have I ever been, operating a pool rental business." I made a sarcastic comment. Yes, it included made-up pricing, because 4 strangers were swimming in my backyard without permission, Mrs. Henderson being one of them. Karen's face twitched. "Now," I said, turning to Bill, "unless sarcasm is now a misdemeanor, I suggest we look into who actually broke the law." I could see Margaret's face shift subtly, like a software update being installed in real time. "You're saying Mrs. Henderson and her guests entered without permission?" "I have no footage to show it. Yet. But I do have multiple witnesses," I said, bluffing smoothly. "And if needed, I'll happily get statements from them." Bill raised an eyebrow. "Unauthorized entry to a private pool could constitute trespassing under local ordinance. And spreading false claims to HOA officials?" I asked, turning to Margaret. "That's not exactly encouraged in the guidelines, is it?" Karen opened her mouth, probably to say something involving the word misunderstood, but Margaret shut her folder with the finality of a courtroom gavel. "I think we may need to pause this investigation while we assess the situation more thoroughly." Karen's jaw dropped. Bill nodded, already making notes. "We'll be in touch. And Mr. Stevens, thank you for your cooperation." "Of course," I said, smiling. "Anytime." Karen's look as they walked away was pure rage. Her clipboard was back in her hand, though now it looked more like a flotation device for her drowning credibility. "This isn't over," she muttered, not even looking at me. "Funny," I replied. "That's exactly what I said last time." As she turned and stormed off, I closed the door and leaned against it, the grin on my face practically uncontainable. She wanted to play municipal warfare? I had a plan for that. Karen had made a tactical error. She tried to weaponize the HOA and city code enforcement against me using what essentially amounted to a passive-aggressive Yelp review dressed up in legal jargon. But she'd failed to account for one critical variable, I enjoy paperwork. Not just tolerate it. Enjoy it. You know how some people do yoga to relax? I file documents and label folders. I once built a color-coded spreadsheet just to track my favorite coffee roasts. So when Karen tried to start a paper war, she brought a clipboard to a database fight. The very next morning, I visited City Hall. I submitted an official statement to both code enforcement and the HOA, notarized, time-stamped, and full of precise details about the actual incident. I even attached still frames from my security camera install invoice. Oh yes, I had expedited the camera system installation, and while I didn't have footage of the original invasion, I sure as hell had an installation receipt with Karen's name in the justification section. Due to recent trespassing involving neighbor Karen Henderson. Bold, italicized, underlined. Then I filed a report with the police. Not pressing charges, not yet, but a recorded incident. Just in case Karen wanted to keep escalating. Paper trail, engaged. But the piece de resistance came that afternoon when I saw Karen in her front yard, pruning her hydrangeas with the kind of aggressive snipping normally reserved for horror films. Afternoon, Karen. I called out, as chipper as a human caffeine ad. She glanced up, startled, probably not expecting cheerfulness from the man she'd just tried to report to the HOA Gestapo. I just wanted to thank you again, I said. City Hall was so helpful this morning. Oh, she said, I twitching. You went to City Hall. I did. I beamed. Wanted to make sure your report had all the necessary context. You know, how you entered my property without permission, brought guests, and refused to leave? Those kinds of details. Karen's hands clenched around her shears. For a second, I wondered if the hydrangeas were just a warm-up. That was a misunderstanding, she said flatly. Totally, I nodded. Which is why I'm so glad I could help clear it up. And just to be safe, I've also started documenting everything. Emails, phone calls, HOA visits. Even printed out your pool invoice complaint and attached a little note explaining the sarcasm. Wouldn't want the city wasting resources on false reports. The smile she gave me was so forced it probably cracked molars. You're escalating this, she muttered. No, Karen, I said, stepping a bit closer. You escalated it when you brought strangers into my backyard and tried to report me to the authorities for calling you out. I'm just documenting the aftermath. For safety. Then I winked and left her standing there, clutching shears and stewing in a compost pile of regret. That evening, I got a surprise knock at the door. For a moment, I braced myself. Maybe Karen was back with new reinforcements. But when I opened the door, it was one of her book club guests, the blonde with the flamingo float. She looked sheepish, an unusual expression for someone who had once suggested my pool needed better lighting. Hi, she said awkwardly. I wanted to apologize. For the other day. That threw me off. I didn't know Karen hadn't asked you, she said quickly. She told us it was all arranged. When you mentioned money, I thought you were joking at first. Then I realized, oh. I nodded slowly. Oh. She shifted her weight. Anyway, I'm sorry. It won't happen again. And then, like a plot twist in a movie I didn't know I was starring in, she handed me a gift card. Target. $50. We took up a little collection, without Karen. I blinked. Seriously? She gave a half smile. We figured it was better than a lawsuit. Touché. But Karen? Oh, she wasn't done. Because 2 days later, I received a letter. A formal, printed, legal-looking document slid under my door like a suburban cease and desist missile. It was from Karen's lawyer, Brad's cousin, if the email domain was any indication. The letter demanded I stop slandering Karen in neighborhood conversations and that I cease any attempts to publicly shame her. I laughed so hard I nearly pulled a muscle. I scanned the letter, annotated it with notes like a high school English teacher fed up with bad grammar, and then did the only reasonable thing. I wrote a reply. A very professional, very courteous reply. Attached were screenshots, time-stamped images of my property, and a copy of the invoice for my newly installed security system, triggered by an incident on July 17th, involving trespassing and uninvited guests. I CC'd the HOA and code enforcement, and, because I was feeling generous, I dropped a copy of it, highlighted sections and all, in Karen's mailbox. She didn't respond. Not that day, not the next. But her blinds? They watched. Constantly. She'd made a move. But I'd just cornered her queen. By this point, the neighborhood grapevine was in full swing. I couldn't walk to my mailbox without catching someone peeking through their blinds. Not that I blamed them. Suburbia thrives on three things: HOA politics, barbecue smoke, and scandal. And Karen had just served up all three on a silver platter. Except the only thing she was grilling now was her own reputation. 3 days after I returned fire with my legally laminated response to her cease and desist cosplay, I spotted Karen pacing in her driveway mid-phone call. My new security system had just finished syncing to my app. 8 cameras, 4K resolution, night vision that could pick out squirrels at 3 a.m., and audio pickup so clear I could have used it to ghostwrite her conversations. Normally, I wouldn't have listened. But when I checked the feed and saw her waving her arms like she was signaling a rescue helicopter, curiosity won. And now he's got cameras everywhere, she hissed. No, Mom, I can't ask him to remove them. He installed them because I used the pool. That's what started all this. She paused, clearly listening to her mother's response. I sipped coffee, waiting. No, I don't know if he's recording me. That's the point of cameras, Mom. He probably has footage of the flamingo float. Her voice cracked like she was recalling a war crime. I choked on my coffee, laughing. Later that evening, the doorbell rang. Again. But this time, it wasn't Karen. It was Brad. Brad was a man who looked like someone had printed him off the default husband template at 50% opacity. He wore sandals with socks, had a receding hairline, and the energy of someone who lost most arguments with his kids. But now he stood at my doorstep, grim-faced, holding a 6-pack of beer like a white flag. I just wanted to say sorry, he said. I blinked. I didn't know Karen used your pool. She told me. Well, it doesn't matter what she told me. I know she's been difficult. I raised an eyebrow. She's been telling everyone you were running a business, he continued. But I've seen the footage. Well, not the footage, but I believe there is footage. And honestly, I think you handled it better than I would have. I leaned against the doorway. She tried to get me fined by the city. I know. He sighed. She also tried to get our neighbor Mary fined last year for excessive bird feeding. Karen thought pigeons were a gateway to lower property values. I didn't know whether to laugh or call animal control. Brad handed me the beer. If she bothers you again, call me. Seriously. Now that was interesting. Karen's own husband issuing a bypass hotline. It was like Batman giving Commissioner Gordon his personal number, except in this case, Batman was just tired and passive-aggressively bringing Coors Light. Thanks, I said. You sure she's okay with you talking to me? She doesn't know I'm here, he muttered. Oof. The marriage wasn't just cracking. It was in the pre-quake tremor stage. The next morning, I found a manila envelope on my porch. Inside, a typed apology, signed Karen Henderson. A $3,200 check, made out to me for security camera reimbursement. And, incredibly, a typed addendum from Karen's lawyer, Brad's cousin again, clarifying that the apology was not an admission of guilt, liability, or wrongdoing, just a gesture of neighborly goodwill. I framed the apology right next to my pool equipment schedule. The check? Cashed that afternoon. But the true victory came one Saturday evening, a few days later, when I hosted an actual pool gathering, with people I actually invited. The Martinez kids were ecstatic. They brought over water guns and goggles and immediately turned my backyard into a kid-friendly war zone. The Johnsons brought fresh-baked cookies and lawn chairs. My brother drove in from the city with his family and a Bluetooth speaker that had exactly 2 settings, off, and music festival. Everyone brought something, snacks, drinks, stories. It was a real pool party. Karen, of course, was nowhere to be seen. Except on camera. The new camera facing her house caught her peeking through the blinds at least 9 times in 3 hours. On the 10th time, she actually stepped onto her porch, clutching her clipboard like a comfort blanket, then retreated when one of the Martinez kids shouted, "Hi, Miss Karen." Brutal. My brother joined me on the deck as the sun went down. So, he said, sipping his drink. That's the clipboard witch. That's her. She looks like she aged 10 years and 2 weeks. She tried to HOA me into submission. He whistled. And lost. What are you gonna do if she tries again? I grinned. Same thing I did last time. Hit record. He raised his drink. To surveillance. Cheers. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the pool glowed under the new lights I'd installed. Laughter echoed. My feet were in the water. And Karen? Karen was still inside. Probably on the phone. Probably plotting. But I wasn't worried. Because now, every time she tried something, the system caught it. Documented it. Archived it. And because eventually, people like Karen stop attacking you, not because they've changed, but because they've finally realized they can't win. It's a funny thing, watching a suburban tyrant lose their grip. It doesn't happen in a single dramatic explosion, like in the movies. No, in the real world, it unravels piece by piece, like a badly knitted sweater caught on a nail, quiet, slow, and oddly satisfying. Karen didn't so much fall from grace as she slid, clawing at the metaphorical walls of suburban supremacy, leaving behind nothing but Pinterest quotes and scorched bridges. It started with the book club. Remember those women who used my pool without permission? After the whole incident, and probably a few stern text threads involving phrases like, "You said this was fine," and "What the hell, Karen?" They ghosted her faster than a bad Tinder date. I saw them around the neighborhood, walking dogs, jogging, hosting their own backyard events, but not once at Karen's place. Apparently, book club had been moved, permanently, to Susan's house. Susan had a hot tub and, more importantly, boundaries. Next came the street reputation. Suburbia is a high-functioning gossip ecosystem. Word spread fast. People who never acknowledged me beyond a polite wave were now casually stopping by while I was watering my front lawn. Hey, heard about that whole pool thing? Crazy, huh? It's wild how some people think unlocked gate means community center. And my personal favorite, from a woman named Cheryl I'd never spoken to before. You're a saint for not pressing charges. If that were me, I'd have called the news. Oh, Cheryl, you get me. Then came the HOA. After the initial code enforcement debacle, they did what HOAs do best, panic and overcorrect. Margaret from the HOA, now sufficiently embarrassed for having taken Karen seriously, began using words like community harmony and trust building in her emails. At the next HOA meeting, which I attended for the first time purely for sport, Margaret publicly thanked me for providing context to a regrettable misunderstanding and emphasized the importance of respecting private property rights. Karen, seated in the back row, looked like someone had force-fed her a lemon. Best meeting ever. But the true masterpiece of Karen's downfall wasn't painted by me. It was painted by Brad. Yes, our beloved Brad. Once a passive husband figure in cargo shorts. Now a man reborn with the fury of someone who had finally reached his Karen quota. The details came slowly. A whisper here, a comment there. But eventually, the full story emerged. Brad had filed for separation. Apparently, the pool incident was just the final act in a years-long performance of entitlement, manipulation, and harmless neighborhood skirmishes that had driven Brad to the edge of sanity. He'd been the one to push for the apology letter. The security camera payment? Brad again. Even the cease and desist letter? A last-ditch attempt by Karen to reassert control, filed without his knowledge. Rumor had it, and yes, it was a delicious rumor, that during one of their final arguments, Brad shouted, "It's a pool, Karen, not a shared resource. You're not the queen of water rights." I wish I could have heard it live. A few weeks after that, the for sale sign went up. Not subtle, not low-key. A big, white, professionally installed sign planted dead center in Karen's perfect front yard, announcing to the world, "We're done here." The neighborhood rejoiced like the HOA had declared free landscaping. Suddenly, people were smiling more. Lawns were being mowed with a little extra pep. The Johnsons put up a festive seasonal wreath. I swear someone started leaving fresh-baked bread in the community mailbox. Karen didn't say goodbye. No speech. No awkward final act of grace. Just a U-Haul, some sullen movers, and a final, lingering glare at my security cameras as she got into her car and drove off. Clipboard probably buried somewhere in the back seat like a disgraced general's sword. I watched from my deck, coffee in hand, pool reflecting the sun like a perfectly cleaned middle finger. And then, peace. Real peace. The kind where you can step outside without fearing an unsolicited HOA citation. Where your pool remains yours, unsplashed by rogue mimosas. Where your weekends aren't interrupted by someone else's clipboard-fueled fantasy of suburban domination. I had won. Not through shouting, not through threats, but through strategy, sarcasm, and letting Karen hoist herself on her own entitlement. And now, every time I floated in my pool, silent, calm, and completely invitation only, I felt it. Vindication. Karen was someone else's problem now. With Karen gone, the neighborhood felt like someone had finally turned off a car alarm that had been blaring for years. The collective tension lifted like fog burning off under the sun. Lawns looked greener. Birds sounded happier. Even the neighborhood Facebook group, which had once been a digital battlefield of passive aggression, was now mostly lost cat alerts and bake sale announcements. It was beautiful. Naturally, I had to commemorate the occasion. So I did the only logical thing. I threw a pool party. But not just any pool party. No clipboard. No uninvited guests. No trespassers. Just friends, family, and neighbors who actually respected things like ownership and basic social etiquette. I sent out digital invites with RSVP links. I even included a note that said, "This event is approved by the HOA. No Karen NG permitted." People loved it. The Martinez family brought their kids, and they were so excited they cannonballed into the pool before their parents had finished saying hello. The Johnsons showed up with fresh lemonade and folding chairs. My brother came up from the city with his wife and 3 kids, who immediately declared my pool way better than the hotel one with the broken vending machine. Even Cheryl, the one who told me she'd have called the news, brought her famous deviled eggs and wore a shirt that said Team Property Rights. It was glorious. Laughter bounced off the water. Floaties bobbed around like colorful jelly beans. The grill sizzled with hot dogs and burgers. It was the kind of afternoon you see in commercials where everyone's teeth are perfect and no one's arguing over zoning ordinances. I floated on a giant blue raft in the center of the pool, sunglasses on, beer in hand, surrounded by people who were there because they were invited. Every now and then, I'd glance over at Karen's old house. The new owners, a sweet retired couple named Edith and Leonard, had moved in a week earlier. They had matching garden hats, offered me banana bread on their first day, and asked if they could borrow my hedge clippers. I said yes, of course. They returned them cleaner than they'd found them. Now that's how neighbors are supposed to be. Later in the day, as the sun started dipping and the kids tired themselves out, my brother joined me on the deck again. "You know," he said, gesturing at the spread of happy humans and pool toys, "you could have rented this out. 10 grand a pop, apparently." I chuckled. "Yeah, but then I'd have to put up with flamingo float ladies and clipboard tyrants." He lifted his drink. "To the fall of House Karen." We clinked cans. Just then, Edith wandered over. "We've had such a lovely time," she said, smiling. "Thank you for including us." "You're welcome anytime," I said. She lowered her voice slightly. "Did you know the woman who lived here before had 6 security lights installed in the backyard because she said squirrels were harassing her?" I blinked. Also claimed birds were spying on her birdbath behavior. Of course she did. "Edith," I said with a grin, "you're going to fit in just fine." A week later, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. In cursive. It was from Karen's mother-in-law. "Dear Mr. Stevens, I just wanted to extend my deepest apologies for my daughter-in-law's behavior during her time in the neighborhood. I understand she caused quite a bit of disruption. My son Brad is doing much better now that things have settled. We hope this letter and enclosed gift help in some small way." Inside, a Starbucks gift card and a coupon for a car wash. It was small. It was hilarious. It was perfect. These days, I use the pool more than ever. Early morning swims. Late night floats under the stars. And sometimes, just lounging beside it, sipping a drink and basking in the quiet knowledge that justice, like pool water, is best served cold. Karen is long gone. Her clipboard? Probably gathering dust in some other poor neighborhood where people still leave their gates unlocked. But me? I've got cameras, clarity, and chlorinated peace. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.